Usually when we talk about like a classic story of revenge, there's this very specific, almost mathematical satisfaction that we expect as an audience.
Oh, absolutely. The scales have to be balanced.
Exactly. I mean, the villain commits some horrific atrocity, the hero suffers immensely, but eventually, they get them back, the score is settled, order is restored.
Right. It's the formula.
It is. And we consume this narrative endlessly, in action thrillers, in true crime documentaries, historical epics. But what happens when those scales are perfectly balanced? And instead of feeling peace, the resolution just leaves you feeling completely hollowed out.
Yeah, that's the scary part.
It really is. What if the cost of getting exactly what you want, of achieving that perfect, mathematically precise retribution, permanently fractures your own soul?
That is a very heavy question.
Right. So today we are looking at a story that just relentlessly forces us to confront that exact reality. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are plunging into a 2.5 millennia-old bloodbath to ask, honestly, a highly unusual question.
It's definitely not your typical Sunday school topic.
Whoa, definitely not. We're asking, how can an ancient, terrifying Greek tragedy written like 500 years before Christ actually deepen your Christian faith?
Yeah.
How does a pagan story about matricide and inescapable generational curses inspire you to understand the gospel more profoundly and, live more fully for him today?
Well, it's a question that requires us to completely abandon our modern, comfortable sensibilities. I mean, the world we're examining today is just steeped in fate.
Completely.
It's steeped in this terrifying concept of physical blood pollution and in a raw, unfiltered agony that, frankly, most of us spend our entire lives trying to inflate ourselves against.
Yeah, we try to avoid that at all costs.
Exactly. So we are looking at Sophocles' masterpiece, Electra, written in Athens somewhere between 420 and 410 BCE. But for this deep dive, we are not just reading a script.
No, the stack of sources for this deep dive is wonderfully complex.
It really is. We are synthesizing the original Greek text with a rigorous academic analysis of the 5th century Athenian historical context. We're also analyzing the actual grammar of the play using systemic functional linguistics.
Which is fascinating, by the way.
Oh, it's incredible. And we are pulling in Old and New Testament intertextual critiques, examining the rather glaring silence of the early church fathers regarding this specific play.
That silence is so loud, honestly.
Right. And finally, we're building a framework for how a Christian worldview responds to this kind of art.
The sheer breadth of the material is what makes this so compelling to me. We are dissecting the cultural oxygen of the ancient Mediterranean.
Yeah.
Our mission today is to walk through the mythic blood-stained halls of the House of Atreus and extract the profound insights hidden in its darkest corners. We are using this pre-Christian tragedy as a cultural mirror.
And what that mirror reflects back is really striking.
It is. It shows the stark necessity of Christ's redemption, the beauty of biblical grace, and the deeply practical ways that you can handle trauma and the temptation of bitterness in your daily life. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Before we can understand how this play points to the gospel, we really have to understand the inescapable gravity of the world it was born into, the context of Mycenae.
Right. And we have to recognize that for the original audience, this was not just some distant fantasy story. Sophocles wrote this play for the citizens of Athens during the Peloponnesian War.
So they were in the thick of it.
Exactly. This was an audience watching a play about a household completely destroyed by violence and grief, while they themselves were living through a literal waking nightmare.
Athens was a mess at this point, right?
A total mess. They had suffered catastrophic naval defeats. Their democratic system was teetering on the edge of collapse, violently clashing with oligarchic factions, and most devastatingly, they had been ravaged by a horrific plague.
Oh man, the plague.
Yeah, the historian Thucydides gives us an agonizing account of this period. He describes people dying unburied in the streets. He talks about a total collapse of traditional religious observance.
Because it just felt like the gods had abandoned them.
Precisely. And there was a complete breakdown of law and order because death was just so omnipresent that the threat of legal consequence no longer mattered to anyone.
So you have this Athenian audience sitting in the theater of Dionysus at this major civic and religious festival, surrounded by the trauma of war and plague, and they are watching the aftermath of the Trojan War unfold on stage.
Yeah, it hit very close to home.
So to set the scene, King Agamemnon, the commander of the Greek forces, has returned home victorious to Mycenae, only to be hacked to death by his wife, Clytemnestra, and her lover, Aegisthus.
Right.
And they don't just kill him. They usurp the throne. They take total control. It's a brutal power grab that traps the surviving children, specifically his daughter Electra, in an impossible claustrophobic reality.
Claustrophobic is the perfect word. Electra is trapped inside the royal palace, which essentially functions as her prison. She is in a state of obsessive, unending mourning for her father.
Just waiting.
Right, waiting desperately for her brother, Orestes, who was smuggled away as a child, to return and avenge the murder. But to understand the true weight of her situation, we have to talk about the ancient Greek concept of miasma.
Blood pollution.
Yes, blood pollution. In the 5th century BCE mind, murder wasn't just a violation of a legal statute like it is today. It was an ontological stain. It was a physical and spiritual contagion.
Like a literal sickness on the world.
Exactly. Shedding kindred blood polluted the murderer, it polluted the physical house, and it polluted the earth itself. It caused crops to fail, it caused women to miscarry, and critically, this miasma attracted the Furies.
Right, the Erinyes. And these aren't just abstract personifications of a guilty conscience.
Oh, no.
The sources describe them as terrifying, relentless deities who literally track the scent of spilled kindred blood. I mean, their entire cosmic function is to pursue and mentally torture anyone guilty of this specific crime.
They are essentially the immune response of the ancient cosmos. In this worldview, blood demands blood, period. There is no therapy, there is no rehabilitation, there is absolutely no forgiveness.
It's just terrifyingly simple.
It is. It operates on a fatalistic cycle. If someone spills blood, the cosmos demands their blood be spilled in return. But if a family member kills the murderer to exact that vengeance,
Then they have now spilled blood.
exactly,
Yeah.
which means the Furies will now hunt them.
It's like a generational curse where the only culturally accepted cure is to commit the exact same crime that started the curse. It's an endless loop.
Endless. Which brings us to the raw power dynamic happening inside that palace. The sources point out the philosophical alignment here with Thucydides' Melian dialogue, which is a text from roughly the same period.
Oh, right. The strong do what they can.
Yes. The Athenian military tells the weaker Melians, the strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. That philosophy is the absolute bedrock of Aegisthus and Clytemnestra's rule over Electra.
Because they have the power.
Exactly. They possess the power, therefore they dictate reality. Electra possesses no power, so her cosmic lot is simply to suffer.
Wait, I have to interrupt here because this brings up a massive contradiction that the sources wrestle with.
Okay, what's that?
If this is a culture that fundamentally worships power, a culture where honor and military might dictate everything, why is Electra the focal point of this play?
That's a great question.
Right, because she is a marginalized, relatively powerless woman in a rigidly patriarchal society. If Sophocles is writing for an audience embroiled in the Peloponnesian War, why didn't he write a play focused entirely on the heroic male avenger Orestes, just kicking down the doors and taking back the throne with a sword?
Well, what's fascinating here is that is precisely the genius of Sophocles' structural design. You see, in Homer's Odyssey, which the audience would have known intimately, Orestes is the undisputed hero.
He's the guy who gets it done.
Right. He returns, he kills the usurpers, he wins glory, and the story just moves on. And Aeschylus, who wrote the Oresteia a few decades before Sophocles, he focused on the cosmic and political implications of the revenge.
Tracing how it leads to the Athenian legal system, right?
Exactly. But Sophocles makes a highly deliberate choice to marginalize the heroic action. He intentionally pushes Orestes' physical journey to the periphery so he can focus a magnifying glass on the psychological devastation of prolonged, powerless grief. He centers on the collateral damage.
Wow. So by centering on Electra, he is fundamentally exploring female agency in a world that aggressively denies women power.
Yes. Electra can't just pick up a sword.
Yeah.
The society strictly forbids her from taking physical violent action.
So she weaponizes the only thing she has left, which is her voice. Her unyielding, obsessive lamentation becomes this profound act of political and moral resistance. She refuses to let the murder of her father be normalized. She refuses to lower her sails and just play along with the usurpers. Her grief is a daily, vocal indictment of their illegitimate power.
And that resistance is incredibly costly to her. Which means we need to look at how Sophocles constructs the internal psychological pressure of her mind. If the miasma and the Furies represent the external crushing force, The actual language of the play reveals the internal crushing force.
And this is where the source material introduces systemic functional linguistics, or SFL, to analyze the original Greek text.
Which is such a brilliant way to look at it.
I love this part of the research. For those listening, SFL isn't about traditional grammar. It doesn't just, label nouns and verbs. SFL approaches language as a complex network of choices made by an author to create meaning within a specific social context.
Right. It's about why the author chose to say it that way.
Exactly. It looks at three metafunctions. The ideational, which is how we represent the world, the interpersonal, how we relate to others, and the textual, how we organize the flow of information. SFL basically asks, why did the author choose this specific linguistic route to arrive at this specific emotional destination?
Yes, and the analysis of Electra relies heavily on Constantine Campbell's framework for verbal aspect in ancient Greek.
Okay, break that down for us.
So in English, we use verbs primarily to indicate when an action happened, past, present, or future. But ancient Greek is deeply concerned with how the speaker wants you to conceptualize the action. That's what we call aspect.
Right.
Campbell argues that the Greek aorist tense conveys a perfective aspect, which implies remoteness. It views an action in its entirety from a distance.
I actually really like the analogy the sources use for this. The aorist tense is like viewing an event from a helicopter. You see the whole sequence as a single, completed, distant event. You aren't in the dirt, you're removed from it.
That's exactly it.
Conversely, the present and imperfect tenses convey an imperfective aspect, which implies proximity. It's like having a GoPro strapped to your chest in the middle of a riot. You don't see the whole picture. You just see the ongoing, immediate, in-your-face action.
Yes. And Sophocles uses this helicopter versus GoPro dynamic to totally manipulate the audience's emotional focus. Whenever any character speaks about the inciting incident of the play, the brutal murder of King Agamemnon, they use the aorist tense.
They use the helicopter view.
Exactly. For instance, early in the play, the verb dine ektein, killed, is used to describe the assassination. By utilizing the aorist, Sophocles is taking this monumental, world-shattering event and deliberately placing it in the remote background. He is acknowledging it happened, but he is linguistically keeping the audience in the helicopter.
He is pushing the historical crime away, but when it comes to Electra's current state of mind, he switches the camera angle entirely.
He straps on the GoPro.
He straps on the GoPro. Whenever Electra speaks about her mourning, her hatred, her suffering, Sophocles strictly utilizes the present and imperfect tenses. In line 103, she uses the present indicative throthrono, meaning I lament or I wail.
It's ongoing, it's immediate.
The linguistic main line of the text is not the plot of the revenge. The main line, the GoPro footage that the audience is forced to experience up close, is Electra's raw, unmitigated emotional pain.
The grammar itself locks you in a room with her trauma. By stripping away the aorist tense from her personal experience, Sophocles deletes the exits. You cannot escape into a distant, objective view of her suffering. You are trapped in the present tense of her agony.
It's linguistic claustrophobia, and this grammatical structure mirrors her psychological state perfectly. I mean, the SFL analysis dives into transitivity patterns, essentially who is doing what to whom in the sentences. It reveals a world starkly divided into material violence and mental suffering. The usurpers command the verbs of material violence. But Electra's dialogue is utterly dominated by mental processes. She's trapped in her own mind. The academic sources diagnose Electra as suffering from arrested mourning.
Yeah, that diagnosis is key. The analysis utilizes Kleinean's psychoanalytic theory to explain this, specifically Melanie Klein's concept of the paranoid schizoid position.
Which sounds intense. What does that actually mean?
Well, when an individual experiences a trauma so severe that they cannot integrate the complexities of reality, their psyche fractures the world into absolutes as a defense mechanism. They split people into all good or all bad.
So there's no gray area?
None. Electra has idealized her murdered father as the flawless, perfect victim. Simultaneously, she has demonized her mother, Clytemnestra, as a monstrous, entirely irredeemable entity. She's entirely incapable of holding nuance. Because she cannot integrate the trauma, she endlessly loops the pain.
It's like she's stuck on a treadmill of trauma. She absolutely refuses to step off, because in her fractured mind, her vocal, ongoing grief is the last remaining monument to her father. She genuinely believes that if she stops suffering, if she stops hating, her father will die a second death.
She has fused her entire identity with her victimization.
Which serves as a brilliant terrifying transition into our Christian critique, because what Sophocles has meticulously constructed here is a high-definition X-ray of what unchecked bitterness does to the human soul.
Absolutely. This play is an unparalleled secular illustration of the spiritual danger the New Testament warns about.
Right. When we look at Ephesians 4, the Apostle Paul says, "Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger and give no opportunity to the devil." And the writer of Hebrews warns believers to see to it that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many become defiled.
That word defiled is crucial.
It really is. It means bitterness isn't just this contained private emotion. It is a toxic spill. It leaches into the groundwater of your life and poisons every relationship, every thought, every potential for joy.
And Electra is the embodiment of that defilement. Her life is entirely consumed by her hatred. She has no marriage, no children, no joy, no future. She lives in rags, starved and abused, and she willingly accepts this because, as she admits, her only purpose is to vex her oppressors.
She just wants to annoy them.
Yeah. She has allowed her completely valid, righteous desire for justice to curdle into an all-consuming identity of vengeance.
And Sophocles highlights the extremity of her choice by providing a foil in the character of her sister, Chrysothemis.
Right.
Chrysothemis is the ultimate pragmatist. She knows their mother is a murderer. She knows the throne is stolen, but she decides that her own survival and comfort are just more important than cosmic justice. She explicitly tells Electra that she has chosen to sail with lowered canvas.
She just conforms.
Exactly. She conforms to the evil regime so she can enjoy the luxuries of the palace.
But the critical takeaway from our Christian worldview analysis is that neither sister represents a viable, healthy response. They are a false binary created by a world devoid of grace.
That's a great way to put it.
Chrysothemis chooses a cowardly, morally bankrupt complicity with evil in exchange for comfort. Electra chooses a courageous, but utterly self-destructive obsession with vengeance. Sophocles is showing us that within a worldview governed by fated blood guilt, there are no good options.
Both paths lead to the destruction of the soul.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You either lose yourself by accepting the evil, or you lose yourself by letting your hatred of the evil consume you entirely.
Okay, so if the culture is fundamentally built on this unavoidable destruction, we have to look at how that culture proposes to resolve it. I mean, if Electra's grief is this inescapable room, what does the ancient pagan world offer as the key to the door?
Right.
And how does that mechanism compare to the solution God provides in the Old Testament? Because the Israelites existed in a very similar ancient Near Eastern context. They understood blood vengeance.
They did. But to understand the stark contrast, we first have to look at the pagan solution, which is, quite simply, endless retribution sanctioned by the divine.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. So Orestes goes to the Pythian shrine of Apollo at Delphi to ask the god how he should avenge his father. Now, the oracle's response is the catalyst for the rest of the play. Apollo explicitly commands Orestes to use deception and craft to deliver the righteous death blow to his mother and her lover with his own hand.
Wait, let me challenge this right here. Apollo is the god of reason, of music, of light, and prophecy. Why is the god of reason sanctioning a dark, deceptive assassination? That feels like a massive contradiction to how we usually view the Olympian pantheon. Why would a deity of light command matricide?
It's an excellent question, and it speaks to the deep anxieties of the Greek religious system. The Delphic oracle often functioned as a way to absorb older, darker, chthonic blood debts into the newer civic and religious structures.
Okay.
Apollo is validating the cosmic requirement of blood for blood. He is authenticating the miasma. But notice what is glaringly absent from Apollo's command.
Mercy.
Exactly. There is absolutely no mention of mercy. There is no blueprint for relational resolution. There is no pathway to communal healing. The guides demand the ledger be balanced through violence, but they offer zero grace to the human beings who have to carry out that violence and live with the psychological consequences.
It's like Apollo is a GPS that only gives you one possible route. Drive your car directly off the cliff of vengeance.
Yes.
And the intertextual analysis in our sources points out that this wasn't just an isolated Greek phenomenon. This was the theological operating system of the entire ancient Mediterranean world.
Yeah, the sources draw parallels to texts like the Ugaritic Aquat epic, where a sister named Puhat dresses as a man to hunt down the murderer of her brother. It's an identical sister-led revenge motif.
Wow.
We also see it in Hittite plague prayers of Marsili II, where a king attributes a devastating national plague directly to the unavenged blood guilt of a previous political assassination.
So it's everywhere.
Everywhere. Retribution was the universal language. If blood was spilled, disaster followed until more blood was spilled. It was a terrifying, closed loop.
But then over in ancient Israel, just a few hundred miles away, the cultural reality of the blood avenger exists, but the mechanism is completely inverted by divine law.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's incredible.
God acknowledges the deep, primal human need for justice, but he radically changes the rules of engagement. In ancient Israel, there was a designated figure known as the Goel Hadam, the Avenger of Blood. This was typically the closest male relative of a murder victim, and it was his cultural duty to hunt down the killer. But God does not allow this system to operate with the blind, fatalistic fury of Mycenae.
Right. When we look at Numbers 35 and Deuteronomy 19, we see the institution of the cities of refuge. God establishes 6 specific cities spread geographically throughout Israel. If a person killed someone, they could flee to one of these cities for asylum.
Which is such a crazy concept for the ancient world.
It is. The Old Testament case laws utilize meticulous if-then conditionals to establish judicial nuance, separating intentional, premeditated murder from unintentional manslaughter.
Deuteronomy 19 gives a very practical example of this. It says, if a man goes into the forest with his neighbor to cut wood, and his axe head slips from the handle and strikes his neighbor so that he dies, he may flee to one of these cities and live.
And here is the mechanism of how that worked. If you made it to a city of refuge, the Goel Hadam, the blood avenger, was legally forbidden from touching you.
They couldn't just drag you out.
Exactly. The elders of the city would hold a trial. If the evidence proved it was premeditated murder, the killer was handed over to face justice. But if it was deemed a genuine accident, the killer was granted permanent asylum within the city walls. They were safe.
But they couldn't just leave whenever they wanted, right? There was a specific theological trigger for their release.
Exactly. The manslayer had to remain inside the city of refuge until the death of the currently serving high priest. And this isn't just an arbitrary timer. It's a profound theological mechanism.
How so?
Well, the high priest represented the entire nation before God. His death functioned as a form of national atonement. It symbolically absorbed the residual blood guilt of the land, cleansing the miasma so that the manslayer could return home completely absolved, and the cycle of violence was permanently broken.
That is breathtaking when you contrast it with Electra. I mean, the Old Testament laws act as a divine guardrail. They acknowledge the pain of the victim's family, but they declare that vengeance is not a private plaything.
No vigilante justice.
Right. The right of execution is taken out of the hands of angry, grieving, traumatized individuals and placed under the sovereign, regulated law of God. God builds mercy directly into the geography and the priesthood of Israel.
There are no cities of refuge in Sophocles' world.
None. There is no high priest to die in Orestes' place. There is only the sword.
And this structural difference translates directly into how the individuals in these cultures process their grief. Our sources compare the lyrical laments in Electra to the laments found in the biblical Psalms, and the divergence is incredibly instructive.
In Greek tragedy, there is a specific form of lament called a komos. It's a highly emotional, lyrical song, usually an exchange between the main actor and the chorus. Electra's komos at the palace gates is agonizing.
It really is.
She details her abuse, she cries out against the injustice, she asks, how long must I suffer? And when you read Psalms 13, 22, or 88, you encounter very similar, raw, unvarnished complaints. David cries out in Psalm 13, how long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me?
The linguistic intensity is nearly identical, but the fundamental difference lies in the destination of the cry. So what's the difference between Electra crying out at the palace gates and David crying out in Psalm 13?
That's the key, isn't it?
It is. Electra is hurling her pain into a cosmic void. She is appealing to an impersonal fate and to deities who enforce pollution but offer no comfort. Her laments can produce a temporary emotional catharsis, but it cannot fundamentally change her reality. It only fuels her isolation and rage.
But the psalmist directs his complaint to a personal, covenant-keeping God. David asks, how long? But he actually expects an answer. He expects intervention.
Right.
He is arguing with the God he knows to be ultimately good. Psalm 13 begins in despair, but ends with, but I have trusted in your steadfast love, my heart shall rejoice in your salvation.
Christian lament is inherently relational. It is an act of faithful speech that moves the sufferer toward communal restoration and deeper trust in God's sovereignty. Pagan lament, as embodied by Electra, is fundamentally isolated. It circles the drain of despair and leads only to tragic repetition.
And we get to watch that tragic repetition play out in the horrifying climax of the play. Because if there are no guardrails, if there is no high priest to absorb the guilt, the pressure in that room has to combust. Orestes and Electra enact Apollo's plan. They get exactly what they want, but the cost of this justice leaves the audience entirely devastated.
The rising action leading to the climax is just a masterclass in psychological manipulation and dramatic irony.
Oh, absolutely.
So, Orestes arrives at Mycenae, but Electra does not know he's alive. Following Apollo's command to use deception, Orestes' old tutor goes to the palace and tells Clytemnestra that her son, the Avenger, is dead.
The speech the tutor gives is one of the most brutal things I've ever read. He doesn't just say Orestes passed away.
Yeah.
He spins this incredibly elaborate, highly visceral lie about Orestes dying in a chariot race at the Pythian Games.
That's so detailed.
He describes the crack of the bronze-shod wheels, the splintering wood, the dust, the way Orestes was thrown and dragged until he was unrecognizable. Why use such visceral imagery? Because he has to utterly convince a deeply paranoid, guilty tyrant.
Right.
And Clytemnestra hears this, and Sophocles gives her a moment of complex maternal conflict, but it is instantly swallowed by an overwhelming flood of relief. The threat to her life and her stolen throne is finally gone.
But while Clytemnestra feels relief, Electra experiences total psychological annihilation.
Her entire reason for existing, waiting for her brother to bring justice, is wiped out in an instant. All her hope is gone. And then the deception twists the knife even deeper.
This scene is agonizing.
Orestes, disguised as a Phocian stranger, approaches Electra. He is holding a small bronze urn. He tells her that the urn contains the ashes of her dead brother.
The dramatic irony here is suffocating. The audience knows Orestes is standing right there, but Electra believes she is holding the physical remains of her only hope.
She takes the urn, and she delivers a speech that breaks you. She mourns the fact that she couldn't wash his body, that she couldn't tend his grave. She says, "O monument of him whom o'er all else I loved, sole relic of Orestes' life, I am dead who lived in thee."
She is mourning a man who is standing 3 feet away from her.
The tension is unbearable. Finally, Orestes cannot withstand her agony any longer. He breaks the deception. He reveals his identity by showing her their father's signet ring.
That recognition scene causes a violent emotional whiplash. Electra swings from the absolute depths of despair to ecstatic, almost manic joy. But what is truly terrifying is how quickly that joy calcifies into cold, calculated violence.
They don't even pause to heal.
No, they don't mourn what they've lost. They pivot instantly to the assassination plot.
Orestes goes inside the palace to confront their mother. Electra stays outside the doors, keeping watch, and then we hear it. From inside the palace, Clytemnestra realizes the deception. She realizes she is trapped by her own son. She screams out, "Oh, son, have pity! Pity the womb that bare thee!" She is pleading for her life. And do you know what Electra, the protagonist we have been weeping with for the last hour, yells back from outside the door?
She yells, "Give a second stroke if thou hast power."
Give a second stroke! She is actively cheering on the brutal butchering of her own mother.
It's chilling.
It is. And then they lure Aegisthus into the trap. They show him a corpse covered by a sheet, letting him believe it's Orestes. Aegisthus lifts the sheet, sees the bloody face of Clytemnestra, and realizes he is dead. Orestes marches him into the exact room where Agamemnon was murdered to slaughter him on the exact same spot, and the play just ends.
It ends abruptly, with the tyrants dead and the cosmic ledger technically balanced. But our academic and theological sources point out the profound, unsettling reality of this ending. Yes, Apollo's justice is satisfied, but it is a horrifying, utterly hollow victory.
They got what they wanted, but they lost their humanity.
They have avenged the destruction of their family by committing the ultimate act of familial destruction.
A son has butchered his mother, and a daughter has cheered him on. They are completely broken.
The pollution, the miasma, hasn't been cleansed. It has merely changed hands. The play forces the audience to ask, does human vengeance actually restore order, or does it merely perpetuate the trauma under new management? It proves that human retribution is fundamentally insufficient to heal the wounds of injustice.
So what does this all mean for us? This is precisely where the New Testament critique steps into the wreckage of Mycenae. The gospel looks at the bloody, hollow victory of Orestes and offers a radical paradigm shift.
A total shift.
In Romans 12:19, the Apostle Paul writes, "Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, 'Vengeance is mine, I will repay,' says the Lord." And Jesus elevates this even further in Matthew 5, replacing the ancient law of retaliation with the command to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you.
To a culture rooted in honor and blood guilt, the command to love your enemies is not just foolishness, it is highly offensive. It sounds like weakness. But the gospel answers the core mechanical problem that Sophocles exposes.
Which is how to break the cycle.
Exactly. The only mathematical way to actually break an infinite cycle of retribution is for someone to absorb the blow without striking back.
Jesus is the ultimate circuit breaker. The cosmic law demands blood for the guilt of humanity. But instead of demanding we shed each other's blood endlessly, Jesus steps into the middle of the cycle.
Yeah.
Philippians 2 describes him humbling himself to the point of death on a cross. 1 Peter 2:23 says, "When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly."
He absorbs the infinite miasma into his own body.
He takes the blood guilt upon himself, dies the death of the high priest, and says, "It is finished." He absorbs the vengeance so we are freed from the obligation to endlessly retaliate. It is the only way the human story can end with actual peace.
It is the magnificent transition from a worldview of tragic inevitability to a worldview of redemptive hope. The cross achieves the true justice and true mercy that Orestes' sword never could.
Now, if this play offers such a perfect, stark contrast that highlights the beauty of the gospel, we have to look at how the early Christians utilized it. I mean, did the pastors in the 2nd and 3rd centuries stand up in their congregations and say, look at Sophocles, look at the trap of Electra, and see how much better Jesus is?
You would think so, right?
Right. Because the research here reveals something genuinely surprising.
It reveals a profound, intentional silence. Our sources conducted comprehensive searches of the writings of the early church fathers Ignatius of Antioch, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Clement of Alexandria, Augustine. Across thousands upon thousands of pages of early Christian theology and apologetics, there are zero mentions of Sophocles' Electra. None.
Wait, zero?
Zero. They completely ignored a literary masterpiece that perfectly illustrates the dead end of paganism. And we know it wasn't out of ignorance. These men were highly educated in the classical tradition.
Right, they knew these texts.
Clement of Alexandria frequently quoted Greek literature when it served his purpose. He quoted Sophocles' Antigone to make moral points. But he utterly ignored Electra.
Why? That seems like such a missed opportunity.
Because the early church fathers viewed the theatrical portrayal of these specific bloody myths as spiritually dangerous. Tertullian, in his treatise De Spectaculis, explicitly condemns the theater. He doesn't just think it's a waste of time. He argues that watching matricide, watching these intense, emotionally manipulative revenge fantasies, inflames passions that are antithetical to Christian meekness.
Wow.
He believed that the author of truth hates the false, and therefore the inherent deception of theatrical acting, combined with the extreme emotional manipulation, opened the soul to demonic influence.
Okay, I have to pause and challenge this, because we really need to reconcile their view with what we are doing right now.
Fair point.
Tertullian says the theater opens the soul to demons. We modern Christians might scoff at that. But then we look at the anxiety and paranoia caused by binge-watching true crime, or the rage generated by political outrage media. Is he entirely wrong?
It's a valid question.
If the early church fathers thought this material was so toxic that they refused to even write about it, should Christians today just avoid secular art entirely? Should we throw out our Shakespeare and cancel our streaming subscriptions and only read the Bible?
This raises an important question. That is a critical tension to navigate. The sources clarify that the fathers did not advocate for complete cultural isolation. As we noted, they utilized Greek poetry when it was conceptually useful. But what they absolutely refused to do was elevate pagan literature to the level of divine revelation or use it as a primary tool for spiritual formation.
They kept it in its proper place.
Exactly. They operated on the principle that Scripture is the norma normans, the Latin term for the norm that norms all other norms.
It is the ultimate measuring stick by which all other art and philosophy must be judged.
Precisely. We do not read Electra to find our doctrine. We read it for discernment. The early church was living in a pagan empire. They didn't need to read about paganism to understand its dangers. They were dodging the furies in their daily lives.
Right, it was just their reality.
But for us, 2,000 years removed, reading a text like this provides invaluable context. It helps us understand the cultural oxygen of the ancient Mediterranean context of the New Testament. When Paul writes about household codes or forgiving one another, or Jesus commands us to turn the other cheek, reading Electra helps us realize how culturally explosive, how radically countercultural those teachings were.
We analyzed the dark, hopeless backdrop of Mycenae so that the grace of the cross shines with its true intended brilliance.
Yes, we aren't looking to Sophocles for salvation. We're looking at his world to understand the profound brokenness that the Savior willingly entered into.
And that brings us to the final and perhaps most important part of our analysis. Let's bring this out of 5th century BCE Athens. Let's bring it into your living room, your local church, your daily life. How does reading the story of a vengeful, grieving ancient princess actually inspire you to love Christ more deeply and live for him more fully today?
Our analysis synthesizes several deeply practical applications for the believer. The first is the cultivation of a deepened, more resilient empathy.
Empathy is a really powerful application. By sitting with Electra's raw, unvarnished grief, especially when we understand how the Greek grammar forces us into close proximity with her pain, we learn something vital about how to sit with suffering.
We learn how to just be there.
Exactly. If you are a Christian involved in hospice ministry or pastoral counseling, or if you are simply trying to be a faithful friend to someone who has experienced a sudden, catastrophic loss, Electra trains you to listen compassionately. It trains us to be present with the pain before we rush in to try and fix it with a theological cliché.
That is a crucial point. Throughout the play, Electra's friends, the chorus, constantly try to manage her grief. They tell her to calm down, to trust that time heals all wounds, to moderate her emotions.
And it doesn't work.
It doesn't comfort her at all. It violently alienates her. It makes her feel entirely unseen. Sometimes the most Christ-like action you can take is simply to sit in the ashes with someone, to weep with those who weep, and to validate that what they lost was precious, and that death is truly an enemy.
The second application is sharpened cultural discernment. We currently live in a media and digital landscape that is absolutely obsessed with narratives of retribution. Think about the massive popularity of revenge thrillers, or the constant churning political outrage cycles, or the way we gleefully tear people down in online call-out culture. We are swimming in a modernized culture of blood guilt and vengeance.
And engaging with Electra equips you to spot those cycles. When you see how the ancient Greeks glorified this endless chain of blood for blood, and you see the hollow, devastating outcome of it, you start to recognize the ultimate emptiness of our modern iterations.
You see the dead end.
You realize that canceling someone or seeking absolute scorched earth vengeance against a perceived enemy doesn't restore moral order. It merely passes the spiritual pollution onto you. It trains your eye to see that the world's version of justice, devoid of grace, always leaves a trail of collateral damage.
Which perfectly sets up the final crowning benefit: gospel confidence. When you spend an hour immersed in a worldview based purely on karma, fate, and the terrifying idea that you have to settle your own scores, it is spiritually exhausting.
It really is.
It is a dead end. Seeing that dead end renews your absolute awe for the grace of Jesus Christ.
The pastoral application of this source material is clear. Electra illustrates a world crying out in agony for a savior it does not yet know exists. And that sharpens your apologetics.
Oh, that's good.
When you have secular friends or coworkers who are wrestling with crushing guilt or unresolved trauma or a deep burning desire for justice against someone who wronged them, you don't have to dismiss their feelings. You can validate their longing. You can say, Sophocles felt that exact same way. The ancient world felt that too.
But then you offer the solution.
But then you can gently point them away from the destructive trap of vengeance. You can point them to the cross, the only place in human history where ultimate justice and ultimate mercy perfectly intersect.
The only place where ultimate justice and ultimate mercy perfectly intersect. That is why we dive into these difficult texts. Let's briefly recap the journey we've taken today. We started at the blood-stained gates of Mycenae, grappling with the terrifying cultural weight of miasma and ancient blood guilt. We analyzed the gripping Greek grammar of grief, seeing how Sophocles used linguistic proximity to trap us in the present tense of Electra's pain.
Then we contrasted Apollo's reckless, fatalistic command of vengeance with the brilliant divine guardrails of the Old Testament cities of refuge, where God built mercy into the very geography of his people.
We examined the harrowing, hollow victory of human vengeance at the climax of the play, recognizing that the sword of Orestes could never truly heal the fractured identity of his family.
We learned from the intentional silence of the early church fathers, who taught us to insulate our minds by using Scripture as our ultimate measuring stick.
And finally, we saw how this dark, mythic tragedy can actually equip us with greater empathy for the suffering, sharper cultural discernment, and a more profound, joyful confidence in the superior hope of the gospel. Sophocles shows us the crushing, inescapable weight of the human condition. Christ shows us the way out.
Amen to that.
I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over today. The ancient Athenians used these bloody tragedies at their civic festivals to collectively process their societal trauma and their deepest anxieties. They put their darkness on a stage to try and make sense of it. Take a hard look at the tragedies you consume today. Think about the true crime podcasts you binge, the revenge thrillers you watch, the outrage-driven news cycles that keep you endlessly scrolling. Are the stories you consume secretly feeding a pagan desire for retribution? Or are they driving you to the foot of the cross in search of a better way? Take that with you today. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.